Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. I'm your host, Jeff Melton. And so tonight's Bitter Pills of Truth are a couple of things. First of all, I want to talk about the massacre that just happened. One of many. They happen every day. But the massacre that just happened, one of the worst, uh, on Monday, I believe. Sunday, where uh, about 270 people, a little over 270 people were killed in the refugee camp of Nuseirat, where Israeli troops invaded. And basically, what happened was let's see, am I sharing the right one here? Nope. Okay. Why is it sharing this one? I'm sorry, this is weird. Should be able to just shift back and forth. Oh, maybe that's why. Okay. Sorry for the delay. So Israeli special forces snuck into the Nuseirat refugee camp to attempt to rescue captives. Israel calls them hostages, but most of them are prisoners of war, where they apparently came in through the so-called humanitarian aid pier that the U.S. constructed for $240 million that I talked about a couple of weeks ago that was basically trashed by a storm, and then they spent tens of millions of dollars repairing it and putting it back up. And it seems to be the case that this so-called humanitarian pier, which certainly doesn't have the capacity to bring in a significant amount of humanitarian aid anyway, is just a fig leaf covering up the fact that the U.S. isn't pressuring Israel to open the border crossings and let aid in. But anyway, we got a picture of one of the actual purposes of this pier when, at least we know for sure, for a fact, that when the Israeli forces that came in exited the refugee camp, they went out by the pier, and there's good reason to think that the vehicle came in by the pier as well. And so again, think about what they did here. They disguised themselves as humanitarian aid workers. They used a truck that looked like it was bringing in humanitarian aid, and that Trojan horse, so to speak, or Trojan truck was actually concealing, a couple of dozen Israeli special forces troops. And there were other vehicles as well, military vehicles. So it wasn't a very well disguised incursion into the refugee camp. And they were pretty quickly identified as not being real humanitarian aid workers. But in addition to these troops coming in, Israeli helicopters and warplanes and quad drones just strafed and bombed the area. And there were actually strikes quite a distance from where they came in to rescue these so-called hostages, up to 3 miles away, actually. So essentially, you could argue it was just an excuse for them to massacre more Palestinians, because, of course, there have been deals on the table for months and months, ever since October, as I've talked about before, to release all of the captives, Israeli captives, both military and civilian. And of course, most of the civilian ones were released in a hostage exchange or prisoner exchange deal back in late November. Um, about 100 Israeli captives in exchange for, I think it was about 300 Palestinian, mainly women and children, who were held captive in Israeli prisons. Sorry, my dog's in here. I'm trying to see if he wanted attention. But anyway, they could have made a deal at any time over the past 8 months of this genocide to get all of their hostages released in exchange for what are essentially hostages, Palestinians being held in Israeli prisons, thousands and thousands of them, either without charge or without having received a fair trial. Anyway, that could have happened, but it's pretty obvious that that wasn't really Israel's goal. So instead of accepting the deal that's been on the table for the past month to have a ceasefire and exchange prisoners and let humanitarian aid in and so forth in, that was just approved by the UN Security Council a few days ago. Instead, Israel decided, and apparently, even though the U.S. was who proposed the ceasefire proposal that went before the UN Security Council last week, the U.S. backed them. And so in the process of this attempt to rescue captives from Nuseirat, who were being held in various apartments there, they did this, and they killed, turns out, about 270 Palestinians, just actually executed a lot of people, as well as bombed all over the place, shelled, and so on and so forth. They also killed 3 of their own people. 3 Israeli captives were apparently killed by the Israeli forces. Now, there's some indication, there were some eyewitnesses suggesting this, that not only did the Americans back this rescue mission slash massacre with providing the weaponry and so forth, but providing the pier, there's also reason to believe that American special forces as well as Israeli special forces were involved in the rescue slash massacre. The aid truck, there's video of this, came from the pier to the camp. It was accompanied by military vehicles, so it wasn't necessarily very well disguised. And a clash between Palestinian fighters and the Israeli and allegedly also American force once they figured out, it's not humanitarian aid. So they called in airstrikes, and this tweet, which is a bit outdated, said over 150 civilians were massacred, mainly in the market that was near where the hostages were rescued from. But it's actually almost 300, and approximately 700 were injured. Let's see. There were photographs of soldiers in uniforms different from the usual Israeli uniforms, and there were also Palestinian eyewitnesses who said they thought that there were American as well as Israeli troops involved. So that's the information we have at this point. It's quite possible that they were basically, even if that isn't the case, even if they just supplied the weapons, supplied the transport, bringing in people through the pier, the U.S. Is basically collaborating in the murder of almost 300 people. Um, let me talk a little bit about what some of the eyewitnesses said about what happened. So this article from Electronic Intifada, uh, the person who wrote it interviewed a few witnesses. Um, so she says more than 270 people were killed, hundreds more were injured. On Saturday morning, many warplanes were seen flying over central Gaza. Then Israel invaded the area with tanks as well as this alleged humanitarian aid vehicle. Nuseirat is a densely populated camp with a market in the middle. Many of those killed were killed in the streets, by the market. Israel sought to justify the mass slaughter of Palestinians by presenting it as an operation in which 4 Israeli captives were rescued. Around 11 a.m., Ahmad Labad heard the sound of missiles falling, one after the other. It was terrifying, he said. I hugged my children and screamed that we had to leave the house and take shelter in a school. As they left their home, we saw missiles exploding around us. Yes, the U.S. is 100% involved in and complicit. Even if they weren't actually, even if there weren't actually troops on the ground, as the U.S. alleges. In fact, the U.S. alleges that a pier wasn't used, which there's video evidence to the contrary as far as that goes. But the U.S. is a full partner in this genocide, continuing to this day, even while kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth, so to speak. They put forward this ceasefire proposal at the UN that they claim Israel came up with. Israeli government officials are like, no, we didn't, and we reject it. And the U.S. is also claiming that Hamas is rejecting the proposal, when in fact Hamas accepted the proposal back in early May when it was first put forward. So just lies all around. Anyway, going back to some of these eyewitness accounts, this person, Ahmad, said, we saw missiles exploding around us. People were screaming and calling for an ambulance. I did not look back around me. He carried his children because they were too afraid to walk. It was only after 2 hours of extreme violence that Ahmad and his family could go back home. Many of my neighbors lost members of their family, he said. I cannot forget these moments, and I cannot believe that I saved my children from this terrible massacre. And it's just, I'm sure those of you who listen to the show probably have watched some video footage of just some of the horrible stuff that's happened over the last 8 months. This is really just one day, granted one of the worst days, but one day out of 8 months where there's just been an ongoing terrible massacre. A terrible massacre every day. Another account, a photographer who carries out a daily live stream near Wadi Gaza, the nature reserve beside the Nuseirat camp, could sense that something abnormal was happening as he worked. He noticed military aircraft flying low in the sky. Moments later, he saw tanks being driven into the camp. After less than an hour, the photographer went to Al-Aqsa Hospital in the city of Deir al-Balah, which is in central Gaza, where the pier and the highway that Israel has constructed through the middle of the Gaza Strip, and of course the refugee camp is. I found hundreds of injured people, he said. People were screaming, and the statistics that I've seen say it was just under 700 people were injured and almost 300 killed, so about 1,000 casualties. And some more eyewitness accounts there. Check out the article at Electronic Intifada. Let's see, what else do I want to show you? Rasha Matar recounts how the Israeli special units executed her child when they infiltrated their home in al-Nuseirat. They killed her 12-year-old son, Yamin, and injured her other children and husband after storming the house and firing bullets and grenades everywhere in al-Nuseirat camp. She says, "We did nothing wrong. They executed my son before my eyes." It's probably in Arabic, so.
فتوا علينا اليهود سمعنا.
All right, so anyway, and there's the gist of what she said. Another person who suffered losses in their family, Asil Musa, said, "Israel killed my two cousins, Jaber and Mohammed, in an attack on their home in Al-Nusrat. Jaber was the father of 4 children, and Mohammed was supposed to celebrate his marriage in December." And naturally, there were all kinds of excuses made by supporters of Israel for this horrible calamity. So this person says, "Bizarrely, I am being criticized for saying that it is a good thing that Israeli hostages were released. Look, none of the people killed in Al-Nusra would have been killed if Hamas did not hold hostages there in a densely populated civilian area. None of them would have been killed either if Hamas did not capture the hostages in the first place." Well, look, dude, they wouldn't have taken the hostages in the first place if Israel hadn't first taken several thousand Palestinians captive who had done nothing wrong. A large percentage of them, more than a third, have not even been charged with any crime. Those that have been charged with a crime, usually it's something having to do with resistance to the Israeli military occupation and apartheid and genocide. And in some cases, simply speaking out against it or posting on social media and whatnot. Hamas wouldn't have done what it had done if Israel had not done what it did first. As for somehow it's Hamas's fault that there were captives being held in a civilian area, I mean, that doesn't justify just executing people who had nothing to do with holding any hostages, as much as 3 miles away from where they were. This is just absolute bullshit. And I mean, how incompetent is it to carry out a rescue operation where you kill some of the people you're trying to rescue? Never mind that. The other thing I wanted to say in response to this guy's comment, which I guess he's kind of wishy-washy about where he stands on the whole thing, but he's basically in this case saying the same thing as staunch supporters of Israel's genocide. The other thing to point out is that Israel could have gotten all of these people out alive, all 7 of them, and all the rest of them, if it had accepted any of the dozen or so ceasefire / prisoner exchange deals that have been put forward, mostly by Hamas, most recently by the U.S., basically echoing some earlier Hamas proposals. If Israel had accepted any of those deals, none of all their people would have come out of there alive, and they were being kept in pretty healthy under pretty good conditions, considering they were being held captive against their will. So none of this was necessary. But Israel, obviously committed 2 war crimes here. One obviously being massacring 275 people, wounding 700 when there was no reason to, and just to capture 4 people. So that really tells you right there what little value Israel and also the U.S. Puts on Palestinians' lives. But basically, they just wanted to. Yes, definitely long live the resistance. They just wanted to stage a political or military victory for the sake of Netanyahu's popularity, hoping that he could hold the government together and ultimately get reelected as prime minister. Which, I mean, that's not, probably in all likelihood not going to happen. But it's a political move. Yeah, obviously he knew he didn't need to massacre a bunch of people in order to rescue 4 people, including 3 of Israel's own people, in addition to 270 odd Palestinians. But small price to pay in his mind for boosting his popularity. In addition to that, I mean, how much of a priority are these hostages anyway? Because through their bombing, they've killed dozens of them already. And in fact, one of the people rescued, Noah Argameni, I believe is her name, said that she was almost killed by an Israeli bombing. And in fact, that same bombing killed 2 of her compatriots, 2 of the other captives. And another prisoner said that the thing that he was most afraid of while they were being held captive was the Israeli bombing. They had to move several times to get away from where Israel was conducting the bulk of its attacks. So they kept having to move locations in order to try, and stay safe. And of course, ultimately, they weren't safe. 3 of them were killed in this so-called rescue operation. And I should add also that these were portrayed as innocent civilians. In fact, all of them were in the military. I don't know in what capacity, whether they were in the reserves or active duty, but they had all collaborated in Israel's military occupation actively. So they're not exactly innocent, which isn't to say that something bad should have happened to them, but nonetheless, my point is that this was a propaganda claim on the part of the Israeli government. And of course, both in Israel and in the United States, this was celebrated as this big coup, this big accomplishment to rescue these 4 people. And the nearly 300 people that were killed and the nearly 700 that were injured were not even mentioned, not even by the Americans, let alone by the Israeli government. So, just all around, callous disregard for human life at its finest. Excuse me. So, and from an objective standpoint, this mission was not a success. It was a failure. Okay, I was going to read an article. Let's take a look at it. Just briefly. Nusrat Massacre, dehumanizing Palestinians is a first step toward their extermination, said Amina Abu Artema. The excessive killing of civilians without any operational need has only one explanation. The Zionist state seizes any opportunity to shed the blood of as many Palestinians as possible. Now, we can't prove that, but given the pattern of indiscriminate bombing and shelling and literal executions at point blank range of people who were just innocent bystanders, this seems very likely. So he says on the morning of Saturday, excuse me, getting over something here, 8th of June, the racist Zionist colonial army carried out horrific massacres in the middle of Governor, killing at least 274 Palestinian civilians, including women, children, and men. Hours later, they announced that these massacres were a cover to free 4 Israeli captives in an Israeli camp. And many of the people living in this area were people who recently fled Rafah, after they had to evacuate Rafah because Israel invaded Rafah and was attacking and killing people there. The most significant observation about this massacre is there was no operational necessity for it. The occupation army could have freed the captives with far fewer Palestinian casualties, with a basic principle that killing even one civilian is a crime that demands accountability. So yeah, I mean, obviously a violation of the international law requirement of proportionality, that you can't engage in a military operation that unnecessarily risks the lives of a large number of civilians, no matter what the reason for it is. That's illegal under international law. It also, of course, is illegal to pretend to be civilians in some way if in fact you're military. I forget what the term is for that, so maybe somebody can say what it is in the comments. That the Israeli military deliberately caused mass civilian casualties is reinforced by the fact that the relentless Israeli bombing targeted a wide area and locations far from the site of the operation, up to 5 kilometers away, as I said. Israel sees the killing of every additional Palestinian as a gain, since its project is fundamentally based on the idea of ethnic cleansing. It wants to instill in the Palestinian consciousness that the cost of any attempt to rebel against the colonial project will be high. Israel is not alone in devaluing Palestinian lives. The friendly governments of this colonial state, primarily the U.S. administration, adopt rhetoric that legitimizes the genocidal crimes committed by the colonial state. Since the beginning of this genocidal war, Western officials have called for the release of Israeli hostages, implying that the only problem in Gaza is the hostages' detention. So, yeah, you see this all the time from supporters of Israel, like a broken record for free the hostages, free the hostages, free the hostages. No mention of the fact that there are a couple dozen times as many Palestinians held in captivity by Israelis, typically tortured, often sexually assaulted, often starved, just brutally treated while they're in captivity, and kept there for months or years, often without any charge. At the start of this war, the racist colonial state's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, described Palestinians as human animals. This description was not a momentary loss of temper, but the most honest expression of the Zionist view of the Palestinian people. All of Israel's genocidal policies before and after October 7th confirm that they do not see Palestinians as humans deserving of life, but as a threat that needs to be eliminated. A threat to what? To Israel's domination of the entire region. They have the aim of a greater Israel, including all of Palestine and parts of some neighboring countries where they control all the resources in that area, and they get rid of as many of the Palestinians or other inhabitants as they can. Meanwhile, back in the USA, we have good old AOC doing her usual fence straddling act. So in New York City, there was an exhibit intended to commemorate the events on October 7th at the Nova Music Festival. that took place. Basically this party, a mile or two away from the Gaza concentration camp, where the claim is that Hamas, Palestinian armed fighters, deliberately massacred 364 people who were just having fun, innocent civilians having fun at the Nova Music Festival. In reality, many of the people who died there were killed either by Israeli fire, or caught up in the crossfire where Palestinians and Israelis were shooting it out with each other, and the Nova Music Festival was moved to this location from elsewhere in Israel at the very last minute. So it's not clear why, but in any case, the Palestinians didn't even know it was there, and there's just very little evidence at this point. There's a lot we don't know about what happened on October 7th, but there's very little evidence that Palestinians deliberately went into this Nova Music Festival to engage in a huge massacre. But of course, that's the way it's portrayed by Zionists in New York, among other places. So they set up this exhibit, and people outside were protesting it. Why were they protesting it? Well, because as I was suggesting, the very one-sided view of what happened on October 7th, where the attitude of the people, who are promoting this exhibit or attending this exhibit is basically supportive of Israel's actions over the last 8 months in the aftermath of October 7th, supportive of genocide. So, as Max Blumenthal points out, there, one of the people who visited the exhibit, took pictures of some of the messages that people left there that were just, openly genocidal. Our unity will let us heal. The Gazans are all Amalek. They should be wiped off the face of the earth, said one of the visitors. Free them as they treat us. Treat them as they treat us. That was the only language they understand. May God avenge their blood. I am struck by the hope and beauty of the will to survive. I am filled with shame and embarrassment that Muslim people are our cousins. I can't comprehend an Allah who is proud of his children and Muhammad's descendants. May the love of life of the nation of Israel overcome the evil of the nation, I guess, of Islam. Okay, so AOC, that's infamous fence straddler liberal who claims to stand up for justice and so forth, but in reality has, to say the least, a very mixed track record as a legislator, decided that protesting outside this Nova Festival exhibit was atrocious anti-Semitism, plain and simple. The callousness, dehumanization, and targeting of Jews on display at last night's protest was atrocious anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has no place in our city, nor any broader movement that centers human dignity and liberation. So she's doing the same classic trick that Zionists have been doing for decades, conflating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, with hatred of Jews or something like that. So, as you might guess, a lot of people were not happy about this. In addition to her tweet, she did an interview with a couple of Zionists. As Michael Tracy describes it, AOC just did a bizarre hostage-style video where she denounced the scourge of anti-Semitism in, quote, progressive spaces. One of her guests is former top ADL official. ADL is the Anti-Defamation League, which is supposedly a group formed to call and confront anti-Semitism, but in fact is simply a pro-Israel lobby group that goes out of its way to conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. So one of her guests, a former top ADL official, said criticism of pro-Israel billionaires is the same sort of bigotry that led to the final solution in Nazi Germany. So, and of course, as you might expect, lots and lots of AOC's fellow legislators made similar claims. So, Mondaire Jones says, I'm horrified by the protesters carrying pro-Hamas signage, chanting anti-Semitic slogans, and using dangerous rhetoric outside the Nova Music Festival exhibit yesterday in Manhattan. This is blatant and vile anti-Semitism, and we must condemn it in the strongest possible terms. So, of course, he doesn't say anything specific about what these anti-Semitic slogans, alleged anti-Semitic slogans were. So I'm assuming it's something like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which obviously no mention of Jews there and no intent to say anything about Jews in general, just free Palestine. He doesn't say anything specific. He just throws out this allegation that, excuse me, anti-Semitism. So Chuck Schumer, her fellow New York congressperson, said it's the lowest of low for anyone to protest an exhibit dedicating to honoring the memory of precious lives that were brutally murdered by Hamas. Sorry, I forgot to share it. So, Chucky, you mean like this? Is this commemorating the memory of the people killed at the Nova Music Festival? Or this? Or this? Or this? It doesn't really seem like it. Palestinian activist Nardine Kiswani had this to say about the Nova Music Festival and the exhibit. The Nova Music Festival was a rave next to a concentration camp. The exhibit at 35 Wall Street is propaganda used to justify the genocide in Palestine. Israel killed 40,000 Palestinians and bombed their own people rather than agree to a ceasefire and prisoner exchange. If this was truly about the hostages, they could have ensured their release long ago. Instead, tens of thousands of Palestinians have died and will continue to be killed, and exhibits like the Nova Festival exhibit are meant to manufacture consent for genocide. Today, we gathered in Union Square, she was one of the organizers of this protest, to mourn the 200-plus Palestinians slaughtered in Nuseirat camp by U.S. and Zionist forces disguised as humanitarian aid on a hostage rescue, quote-unquote, mission. A Zionist counter-protest was announced to celebrate this mission, so we took them to the exhibit. The exhibit was created by Zionists like Scooter Braun and will be in New York City until the 16th. It's not enough to boycott it. Protest it. Make sure everyone going in there knows they are supporting the propaganda arm of the genocidal army killing thousands of Palestinian children. Okay, so AOC, as you might imagine, got a ton of flack for her statement. And as she usually does, she was very defensive about it. We can mobilize to end the atrocities in Gaza and combat the rise of anti-Semitism at the same time. Bigotry in organizing spaces imperils everyone's work. I work to end the war, protect all my constituents, and fight AIPAC. Believe it or not, you can do all three. Sorry, don't believe it, AOC, because you're basically doing the bidding of AIPAC by accusing protesters, against the Nazareth massacre and against this laughable propaganda exhibit, where these pro-genocide nutcases were free to spew their bile. You're defending all this, and you're calling the protesters anti-Semitic. So sorry, you're not doing all three. Additionally, the accusation that my disgust at anti-Semitism and bigotry must be because I'm getting paid also reeks of anti-Semitism, especially given the mountain of evidence of how I fight AIPAC and other lobbies every day is unsubstantiated, conspiratorial, and gross. I am one of the only members of the Congress to co-sponsor the ceasefire resolution since day one. I consistently vote no on military budgets, including further weapons to Israeli government. You don't. You sometimes vote no on them. I think Netanyahu is a war criminal. AIPAC targets me, and I find anti-Semitism disgusting. Deal with it. So let's see. What did I say in response to her? You echoed the gaslighting of those who support Israel's genocide, including the president whom you have endorsed, despite his also being a war criminal, and you won't call out Israel's genocide for what it is. Congrats on being offensive, but you're still complicit. Deal with it. Zay Squirrel, one of my favorite accounts on YouTube, on X, said, approvingly quote tweeting genocidal Zionist murderous maniac Yair Rosenberg, who has been gleefully celebrating the mass rape, torture, and killing of Palestinians long before October 7th during an active genocide, shows just how much of a depraved, racist scumbag you really are. He or she doesn't really mince words, as you know if you follow this account. AOC, the lover of Yair Rosenberg in the Atlantic magazine, Yair Rosenberg was one of the Zionists she interviewed, which recently published it is legally possible to kill children and have been the main pushers of the ongoing genocide of Gaza. It's like if she gleefully repeated Stryker's rants from Der Stürmer and went, what, he's saying something agreeing with me here. You have a problem with that? Or if she did it with Nick Fuentes. Of course, that would never happen because those targeted by them are human to her. She considers them to be human. But the people Yair Rosenberg and the Atlantic push and launder the genocide and murder and rape of are subhumans to her. Palestinians are purely props that she sometimes plays around with to pretend she's actually sort of a leftist. She doesn't even care. It doesn't even enter her depraved mind to care as she goes on deranged, hysterical rage rants about anti-genocide protesters on a daily basis now. Okay, I'm not going to read all of this, but you get the idea. AOC is nothing but an opportunist. She just goes where the wind is blowing and pretends to be in favor. Yeah, she's disgusting and a fraud. She pretends to be in favor of some cause or another, being against some injustice. So in this case, she pretends to be on the side of the Palestinians, but time and time again, he's starting with the very first protests against the Israeli genocidal reaction to October 7th. She has been consistently labeling protesters as anti-Semitic, without any evidence that they are. And she actually, surprisingly, was not among the 91 Democrats who recently voted for a resolution um, basically saying that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. But here she is basically implying that, and she's implied it before. So no sympathy whatsoever for her. So we're at an interesting juncture in terms of where things are going. I don't know how closely you've been following the military situation in Palestine and surrounding areas lately, but it's looking more and more disastrous for Israel. Yeah, all you have to do is look at her support for genocide, Joe. That's exactly right. You know, and Joe Biden is, he's been 100% behind Israel, his entire political career, and Israel is now committing, a obvious genocide that only the most loony defenders of Israel can deny is happening. We all can see it on our cell phones and computer screens, happening on a daily basis, and it easily meets many of the criteria for genocidal acts, as well as there being clearly demonstrated intent. And Joe Biden is supporting it 100%, and she in turn is supporting Joe Biden's reelection 100%. And really, that's all you need to know. But there's more. She's collaborating in this fiction that people who are protesting against Israel's genocide are like that anti-Semitism is rampant among them, and that's just ludicrous. And in fact, of course, there's a lot of anti-Semitism from actual right-wingers who've been anti-Semitic, of course, since the Nazis and well before then. But really, you could say that the conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism is one of the main forms of anti-Semitism in and of itself, because, of course, many critics of Israel are Jewish themselves. And so when you say criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic, you're denying that Jewish people have the right to have whatever opinion they want about Israel. You're implying that there's something inherent to being Jewish of supporting Israel, and that's just ridiculous, and it's anti-Semitic. And by conflating the two herself, a lot of the time, AOC herself is being anti-Semitic. So, much as she likes to pretend otherwise, and much as she occasionally votes the right way on stuff in Congress, AOC is complicit in this genocide. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about for today. Please like the stream on YouTube or X or wherever you're watching it. Please share it with your friends. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. And I'm working on a piece on my Substack blog that should be out very shortly. So check that out. It's jeffmelton.substack.com. And keep fighting for freedom in Palestine, everybody. I don't think I finished my thought a second ago. That really we see a lot of signs that the tide is going against Israel. They're losing the war militarily, even though they're slaughtering tons and tons of people. You've probably seen pictures of the settlements in the north of Israel, all on fire. Nobody can live there. The Iron Dome has been basically taken down in northern Israel by Hezbollah. Yemen is still enacting a very strict blockade. There's absolutely no sign that the resistance in Gaza is faltering in any way. They're still carrying out successful attacks on Israeli forces in Gaza every single day. And now the U.S. is kind of of two minds. They want to keep supporting Israel, but they're realizing that at least a lot of them are realizing that there's no way Israel can beat Hamas and the other groups. Israel's economy is collapsing. We don't really know because Israel keeps it very well hidden, but probably more than 1 million people, if not more, have left Israel altogether. Hundreds of thousands have fled both the north and the area around Gaza, and they're being put up in hotels by the government at great expense. The economy in Israel is collapsing. So, how long can they carry on? And then, of course, the U.S., after vetoing, a dozen or so ceasefire proposals in the UN, they finally put forward one themselves. It basically echoed a lot of the proposals that Hamas had made earlier. Of course, Israel's rejecting it at this point, but how long are they going to keep being able to go on with what they're doing? I think their time is running out, but I don't care to make any guesses as to how long it'll be before that happens. But we will win, and one day Palestine will be free. And with that, I'm going to go take some cough medicine and see you guys next time.